Ohio State won again. But to say that this one felt just a little different than the one before, it might be the biggest understatement in the history of Bourne Blitz. Welcome to the podcast daily. That's Zach Bourne. I'm Austin Ward. And a week ago, it got a little spicy on a Monday version of the podcast daily. Some challenges issued, some questions raised, some concerns. And I think, Zach, we probably feel a little bit different about Ohio State today than we did then.
1 week is a long time and a lot of different feelings, right? Yeah, I mean, how could you not feel great after Saturday with the way that game was won? And I've talked to so many people, former coaches, some current coaches, people that are still involved in the program. It's just like you have a win like that, especially on the road, and just grinding out the fourth quarter the way they did. I mean, this is a program-changing win, and I don't mean that in a way of like the program hasn't been great. I'm just saying the momentum that it does within that program, the negative comments have been made, me including, right? Last week when I was given my open opinion about things that were going on. All of those things, all of those questions, everything that everyone's been talking about the last 4 years, in my opinion, they're not even talking points moving forward after a win like that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to relitigate our conversation from a week ago because, as you mentioned, it's no longer really relevant. Ohio State went on the road; they beat Penn State 20-13. But I think the points that were raised were certainly coming from. Were certainly valid because Ryan Day put it in the starkest terms that I ever remember him doing after a game, saying that Ohio State was at a crossroads. The program was at a crossroad. These players that came back that wanted to win something of consequence that they had not done, they were at a crossroads. That wasn't, for no reason. It didn't just like, oh, you know what? That was important. They knew they were going through it. They knew there was adversity and that the performance against Nebraska the week before was putting their backs even further against the wall. So it wasn't like they didn't have things to address. I think the real value is that Ohio State actually did that and then went out and performed like the hardest working team in America, which they were setting out to be. That was a tough, badass win.
Oh, no doubt. And I think, you look at the past couple of years, and we talked about it last week on the show of when they've lost some of those big games. It was the inability to finish and out physical people late in the game. If there are any questions about that on Saturday, I was there, you were there. The way they finished on Saturday is unlike I've ever seen a Ryan Day coached football team, right? I mean, they pulled a page out of Michigan's book from last year, literally where they ran it, 11 plays in a row, I believe, and ate up the last 4 minutes and 50 seconds, whatever it was. I mean, Penn State knew they were running the football. And this is a defense that was, I think by a lot of people, thought they were one of the best front sevens in the Big Ten with the way they've been playing. And then for Ohio State to do that with Donovan Jackson at left tackle, with Carson Hinsman at left guard, and they just took the will out of that Penn State defense. Coach Meyer used to talk about it, calling checkmate. Right? Checkmate means they're done. They know they are. There's nothing they can do. That offensive line called checkmate on Saturday against that Penn State front seven. And when I say they grinded, you could see the excitement too. I know, I watched the TV copy Sunday morning, and you could see the excitement. You could see the leadership. You could see Seth McLaughlin and Donovan Jackson literally smacking dudes on the helmet and getting amped up. Like, I haven't seen the offensive line that amped up on a drive in a long time. And you saw once they went out to that the 2-minute warning, 2-minute timeout, and they've been driving it knowing like, hey, listen, we can finish the game right here. And they go out and do that. I mean, I think that's the confidence that this team needs. That's the confidence that offensive line needs. And that's why I say I think it's a program-changing win, because after that win and the excitement after the game that everyone saw, I mean, we could start talking now. Where does it take this team, right? They needed a win like that. They needed some positive energy, some positive momentum, and that was it. So now listen, it wasn't even a fully clean game on Saturday. I think there's a lot of things that we could sit here and dissect and say there were a lot of mistakes that were made. So if you take that confidence that they just had and that tenacity and that physicalness that they played with on Saturday and combine that with a very well executed game, I think you start talking about national championship again, right?
Yeah. That's what goes right back into the picture here for Ohio State, because when you use these Ryan Day terms of the crossroads, that was what was on the line. They were not going to get to Indianapolis. And yes, a 2-loss Ohio State could still get into the college football playoff and win a national championship. But boy, is that the long way around, especially you don't know what the motivation level would continue to be for the roster. Again, this is another hypothetical conversation that it's great that we don't have to have. But I think it's important to offer reminders that was really the precipice of what Ohio State was staring down on the road against an unbeaten team, number 3 in the country, who could do some things that were going to attack Ohio State where they've, really been questioned the most. A makeshift offensive line against a talented defensive front, a defensive line that's, we have said has not got enough pressure, a quarterback who could make some plays, but not a ton, but he was real willing to use his legs, hurt Ohio State in some ways there. And then Tyler Warren, just a piece where I don't know that anyone has a true answer for stopping him, but all those, that's what adds more. I thought, Zach, I don't want to keep you waiting, but it was not their cleanest game. It was their toughest game. And I think that that's really significant.
I completely agree. And when we go to, I know last week was last week, and we touched on it a little bit, but so many of our comments last week and surrounding the questions have always been, and I don't think I mentioned this on last week's show, is Coach Meyer was notorious for saying coaches coach during the week, players play on Saturday. Meaning, hey, listen, we're going to coach the hell out of you. But on Saturday, there's no real coaching. We're just managing the game. At the end of the day, those 60 minutes, players got to play and make the plays, right? And that's what I loved on Saturday, is that those players answered the call. Guess what? Defense, Tyler Warren's a dog, man. That dude is a tough dude. Seeing him in person, I didn't think he was
it's different seeing him in person, right?
Yeah, correct. I thought he was a really good player, but seeing him in person, being able to see all the things he did, I'm like, that dude's a difference maker, a difference maker. And yes, you're going to give up some stuff, but for them to contain him the way they did and then get down there on multiple different times on defense right before the half, right? IGB with the interception. And then with 5 minutes left in the game, you get down on the 3-yard line, 4-yard line, and stop them on 4 downs, and you just bow up and say, listen, we're going to play physical defense. We know you're running it straight down our throats, but we're going to stand tall and we're going to stop you. That's players making plays. And then literally the offense gets it, says, hey, listen, 11 plays in a row, we're coming straight down at you. You know it, and we're just going to freaking dog you. And then guess what? Next play, we're coming at you again. And so that's what excites me. And I know you and I can go back and forth on this for hours upon hours, because so much of the attention has been on Ryan Day and the coaches. Finally, the players answered the call, and that's what I love to see. They went out there, they knew, hey, listen, this is on our back. We got to go make a stop. We got to go do the 4-minute drill. Both sides of the football did that, and to your point, wasn't a beautiful win. It was a freaking tough ass win, and that's what this Ohio State program needed.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that, not just this year, I think that this goes back even that you raised this point on a lot of Bourne Blitzes a year ago about the passion on both sides of the ball, the leadership, how much would they exude during a game? And certainly that did not happen against Nebraska, which is why some alarm bells were raised. But I was trying to keep track, and I was writing in my notebook on Saturday night all the different players that at times I saw, whether it was celebrating, whether that was a little bit of trash talk that was not walking the line of a 15-yard penalty the way Penn State might have. But right from the start, you had Quinshawn after those 2 runs in the first quarter coming to the sideline and pounding his chest. He's coming out. He's celebrating with Travion Henderson as Travion Henderson goes out in the game. You mentioned a couple plays with Seth McLaughlin and Donovan Jackson, Lathan Ransom. Denzel Burke after some plays with, adding in a celebration in a way that he's I felt like for most of this year, and the Denzel Burke I've always known has been one of the most supremely confident people, self-confident people I've ever met. And even when he was a true freshman, he was not afraid to talk about that and show it. I thought he had been maybe a little too businesslike at times in the first half of the season, and he's celebrating. Of course, you had IGB doing that. Caleb Downs with a little bit more. I ran out of room in the notebook because so many players were doing it, and that's the first time that's happened. Now, what does Ryan Day like to say? That execution breeds emotion. Okay, sometimes it does, but sometimes you just need to be fired up for the sake of being fired up because they didn't execute perfectly, but they still had a reason to celebrate after the game.
Yeah, that's where I completely agree with you. I understand what Ryan's saying, but they didn't execute perfectly on Saturday by any means. But you brought up all those guys, and yeah, I mean, like I said, I was there and I'm watching Quinshon Judkins early on in the game, and he even went over to, I think it was maybe after the third series, or no, second series after they scored the touchdown, when a Mecca Cup touchdown. Quinshon goes over there and freaking daps up the offensive lineman and still gets in their face. Like, let's go. Like, we need to continue to do that. I don't think I've seen that all year. You saw Will Howard even more animated than what he normally is. And I saw him, getting some offensive line guys' faces. And it wasn't even negative stuff. I saw it especially on that last drive where he's almost getting them going. Like, yes, let's keep that anger going, right? And you brought up Seth and Donovan. I think that's the most animated I've seen those two guys this year. And I even seen, and I knew this game was different. Early on in the game, I saw the O-line come over, and they normally sit down where they do on the bench. But I saw literally Seth and Josh Fryer say something to the guys. They all stood up and they all went to the sideline, and they're standing there cheering on the defense. And when I saw that, I'm like, these dudes are locked in. They're ready to go. They were celebrating when the defense was on the field and hyping those guys up. Like, that's everything we talked about last week. Like, that gets everyone invested in the game. That gets everyone on the same page. I even saw Caleb Downs patrolling the sideline when the offense was on, and he's dapping guys up and getting guys going and getting people into the game. Heck, I saw Caleb Downs again. I think it was maybe JT and some other guys. Literally, when the offense came over for a timeout, they were out in the offensive huddle, like hyping guys up, like, let's go. Like, you got this. I think that's the first time I've ever seen that all year. So, everything that we talked about last week, and we talked about the emotion, the killer instinct, the pure leadership during the game, all of those things were prevalent on Saturday by multiple people, multiple times, and it was exciting to see. You could just see everyone feeding off of one another.
Yeah, when I saw Caleb Downs out there talking with some of the offensive guys, I thought, oh, is it time for that wrinkle? Are we going to see him on offense as part of this solution? That didn't happen. So it's still hidden away in that bag of tricks. But in that bag, Chip Kelly, I think, really, him and Ryan Day, Justin Fry, Brian Hartline, Carlos Lachlan, Keenan Bailey, you can put them all out there and say, what a fantastic job they did coming up with some solutions, because putting Carson Hinsman back in the lineup at left guard, first start of Donovan Jackson's career at left tackle, playing without Will Kazmarek at tight end. This is a little bit of a patchwork situation, and you saw new misdirection, you saw different running schemes, you saw different ways for Ohio State to try and keep Penn State off balance and maneuver around some of the issues that they knew they were going to encounter on the offensive line, because, again, Penn State's really good. It wasn't just because Donovan Jackson or Carson Hinsman can't handle it. I think that they largely played up to what I think Ohio State would have wanted out of him, even though they only scored 20 points. Like, we're not going to say that it was an amazing performance, but like the way the coaching staff manufactured the yardage and the points to get a win there, I thought was pretty refreshing to see.
I completely agree. The way they manage the game, and you brought up even Coach Lachlan. You look at the running backs, and you saw Quinshon start the game. I think it might be the first game he started this year from that standpoint. But they were just spot on. When they needed that grinder, they were putting Quinshon in. When they needed the change of pace, they were putting Travion in. Both of those guys blocked their butts off, right? You saw them be utilized as lead blockers, but just the different things that this offensive coaching staff was able to do. And to your point, Josh Simmons, people would argue, is, could be the best offensive lineman on the team, right? You bring up Will Kazmarek, who I think everyone agrees is the best blocking tight end on the team. And going into a road game like that in the Big Ten in a top 5 matchup where it's hostile, you're going to have to be able to run the football. They were able to do that, especially coming off a second half in Oregon in a game against Nebraska where you weren't able to do that. They made the correct changes during the week. They coached their butts off and had an unbelievable game plan coming into this. And you saw a lot of things that they haven't done. So many times people have talked about zone into the boundary. Well, guess what? Now they put the formation to the field, all the wide receivers over there, and they run speed option into the boundary. And I think they did it multiple times and got some massive yards on it. You saw them utilize, obviously, Will Howard on the quarterback leads where, Travion absolutely unloaded on that dude where when Will fumbled out of the end zone. And we talked about execution, right? That's one of those things where could have easily been 7 points there. But the different things that they did on offense were always one step ahead of this Penn State defense. And you brought up, they only put up 20 points. Guess what? 20 points won this football game. And it's what they needed to do, and they called the right plays in the right situations.
Yeah, I think, and I didn't bring up Will Howard when I was talking about the guys who showed some of that leadership and fire. He obviously did from start to finish, and he had a ton of emotion and a lot of Buckeyes celebrating him when he walked off the field at Beaver Stadium. If you finish off that run, even if he just stepped out of bounds at the 2, that game could have looked very different. But he had the turnover there. He obviously had the pick 6, and there were a couple of the deep throws. Jeremiah Smith stopped at the top of the route on the one, and I saw it out of the corner of my eye. I was like, it didn't connect, and I was like, I still thought there was a chance Jeremiah Smith could have made that play because we see him do it all the time. The one to Carnell Tate, floats towards the sideline a little bit. So there's 4 plays that Will Howard would want back, but he never got rattled enough by that, Zach, and you could see how he would, because the first drive of the game is a pick 6. You're down 10 in front of the biggest crowd in Beaver Stadium history. Like, boy, that's a tough one to bounce back from. Like, we could say honestly and objectively that Will Howard did not play his best game. But again, I think it falls into that same category of mental and physical toughness to respond to it there, where if their quarterback goes in the tank and gets, upset and out of focus because of that, you got no chance of winning that game. That did not happen with Will Howard.
Yeah, I mean, right after the pick 6, that next series, they drive right down the field, and then he threw a dime to Mecca down into the corner of the end zone, right? And that was, 30-yard pass, whatever it was. Like, it was on the money. So to your point, yes, this Ohio State team went – and that's what I think people don't realize. And we weren't talking about it on this show. I was talking with some other people going into last week. When you go into a Big Ten road game, especially a top 5, I'd say top 10 matchup, right? And it's a hostile environment. It is so hard to gain momentum, but it's so easy to lose it, right? And you saw that early on as the momentum at Penn State. 6 minutes into the game, they're up 10-0. And you see this Ohio State team methodically drive down the field right there, capped off by the 30-yard pass to Mecca, and then come out, get off the field, get the ball the next series, and go down and score. And next thing you know, it's 14-10, and you're like, man, well, guess what? That momentum's changed pretty quickly. There was no angst. There was no negativity on the sidelines. Like, it could have been so easy for this team to duck their heads, especially Will Howard, who he's had this game circled on, his calendar since probably he transferred to Ohio State, knowing like, hey, listen, I finally get to play Penn State in Happy Valley, a place that I loved going when I was a kid. So, there was so much emotion going to this game. He could have easily tucked his tail and been like, man, what's going on? Instead, guess what? He rallied the troops. He kept everyone going in a positive direction, and they took control of this game after those first 6 minutes.
Yep. And the defense allowed them to find their footing a little bit. They did not allow an offensive touchdown. So I was talking with Jim Knowles outside the buses on Saturday during the notebook, and he said, hey, look at this. A text from someone close to him. It's like Andy Kotelnicki's last game without scoring an offensive touchdown was at Kansas. Jim Knowles was the defensive coordinator at Oklahoma State. That was in 2021. Andy Kolnicki dialing things up, scoring offensive touchdowns left and right. Big time promotion to Penn State. No offensive touchdown against Jim Knowles at Ohio State. What a performance. He didn't do it by himself because, as you said, it's Saturday. The players make plays. But I thought, there were some plays that the Rushman made for Larry Johnson's group. I thought, Caden McDonald showed up in some pretty big circumstances, which was significant. But Cody Simon and Sonny Styles playing another whale of a game for James Laurinaitis at linebacker. You saw IGB, Denzel Burke making plays there for Tim Walton. You know what Caleb Downs and Lathan Ransom are doing for Matt Guerrieri. I keep trying to name as many names as possible for a reason, Zach, because you don't go on the road and beat an undefeated opponent in their place the way Ohio State did without everyone in the program being involved. But when we're talking about the defense, like, you can just go down the list. You don't deliver an outing like that without all 11 and then everybody else on the sideline and anyone who's touching the Ohio State program.
Yeah, I mean, when you go and win a game like this, it has to be a team effort. And, you've named all these people, and I think that's why when you saw the celebrations on Saturday after the game, it didn't matter if it was offense, defense, special teams. Guys are hugging one another. Guys were celebrating. You obviously saw, the dance videos in the locker room afterwards and the excitement there. And Ryan even talked about in his post-game press conferences, he hasn't seen a locker room as animated like that in a long time. And the reason why is because those are the kind of games that bring an entire team together, an entire program together. Like, there are so much in college football where it's offenses on their own, defenses on their own. Even during the week, you're having your own meetings, practice session. Like, you're a lot of times split on separate fields, right? Until you come together for a couple quick team periods. So for that team to be able to come together holistically, offense, defense, and we already talked about defensive guys being offensive huddles, offensive guys getting out there in defensive huddles and cheering each other on. Just that morale builds something within that locker room that you just feel it. And I think those guys finally felt it. And like I said, there are so many people on social media that want to remind us that what wasn't done correctly. And you and I could have a full show, and I'm sure the coaches could too, especially on Sunday at film, what didn't go correctly and what wasn't executed properly. But that kind of win, I don't think people realize how hard of a win that is. I don't think people realize what that does for a team, what it does for a locker room, what it does for guys' psyches. If they match that moving forward, which once that happens, it's kind of contagious, right? It spreads quickly, just like a cancer in a locker room can completely take things down. A win like that and a morale like that can build up a locker room very quickly and make things go in the positive direction. I think that's what you're going to see. Watch how this team plays. Like, everyone kind of gets bought in a little bit more when you bring 75 guys on the road that are in a game like that and they win. There's just something special about it. And I know Urban talked about it on Fox afterwards. And, he could go on and on about special wins that have led to national championship type of seasons. And I know everyone has been wanting to point the finger at Ryan Day for all of these losses and, the lack of physicality, right? That was a big thing last year, is that Ryan Day doesn't have a physical program. That game Saturday, if you don't think that was physical, I don't know. I don't know what you consider physical, because in my opinion, that was a damn good football team that went out there Saturday in Ohio State. It was a damn good football team that they beat in Penn State, and they beat them by literally out physicaling them from the start to the finish.
Yeah, so you do have to keep that going. Like, they're not done. There's a lot of football still ahead of Ohio State. The next 2 weeks are, ones where you don't want to get complacent, but you know what you should do against Purdue in Northwestern, even though that's in Wrigley Field and it's a baseball game, I think. I don't know why else it would be there. So that'll be a new challenge. But then you have Indiana and the rivalry at the end of the month. So, like, there's a lot of football ahead. Ohio State has to be able to duplicate what it did multiple times, especially then if you're talking about Indy or the college football playoff beyond that. The work is not done, but it was done.
You hit the nail on the head. And these next two games aren't easy by any means. You should take care of business, but it could line up for 3 banger of a games for this Ohio State football team. Like, you talk about Indiana, who more than likely, I mean, who knows what happens this week against Michigan. But if they win that game, they're coming into Ohio Stadium undefeated, top 10 team. Then you obviously have the rivalry game, and it doesn't matter what the records are for that game. Seriously, it does not. I played some really, really, really bad Michigan teams when I was in college, but guess what? They come out and they fight, and everyone fights in that game. So guess what? They're going to have a tough matchup then. And then if you win those, then you're going to the Big Ten championship game against an Oregon team that – it still wants some of your blood, even though you went out there and beat them. They want to show the rest of the country that, guess what, we deserve the number 1 seed, that we want a first round bye. They're still going to come out. It's going to be a nasty football game. So, man, to your point, the Bucks, it's not like, everything is stopped here and we can, sit down and reap our preach how great we are and all these things. Yeah. There's still a lot of work to be done, and it's coming.
Yeah, those are 3 big games that you outlined that are still looming. How about 3 and out to close it? I think I know what's going to happen is you're just going to say no 3 and out. The whole team gets your awards.
I mean, I've thought about that, but then again, I'm like, Austin would probably tell me I'm taking the easy way out. And I think there are some guys that need singled out.
All right, let's do it.
I'm going to single some guys out just because everyone could get a shout out here. And we did. We shouted out a lot of guys.
We did.
That deserves it, right? But my 3 now, I gotta mention these guys because I don't think they get enough credit for their entirety of their performance on Saturday. And my number 3 is Quinshon Judkins. And we've talked about the leadership, but Quinshon, you could tell throughout first part of the season or what's been going on, he's kind of been trying to find his place, right? He was the cowbell at Ole Miss. He was the star player. He obviously comes here, split in the backfield with Travion. He's been a great teammate. But you could tell he can never really get out of his shell. On Saturday, man, he was their workhorse. And you could see Ohio State went to him, and he was running his butt off and was physical. You could see the O-line too. They were feeding off of one another, right? And that you used to see that a lot with like Zeke and J.K. Dobbins. Like those guys used to feed off of one another. And then his leadership, man, I've never seen him that animated on the sideline, never seen him that vocal to other players. So he's number 3. Number 2 is Caleb Downs. He is a freaking stud. I mean, a stud. I could talk about so many guys on defense. Guys stepping up. Obviously, you got your starting defense, but Caden McDonald, right? I mean, Kenyatta Jackson, I thought made some big plays on Saturday. Like Jermaine Matthews went in multiple times, and you didn't really notice him because guess what? He was locking dudes down. So, there's so many guys I could point out, but Caleb Downs, his leadership, you could see him starting to come out of his shell as well, getting animated, being vocal, loved it. And there were some plays on Saturday where I'm sitting there and I'm watching them and I'm like, oh my God. Like some of these shoe saving tackles.
Oh my God.
It's insane how quick he is downhill on that angle to make some of those plays. Watching the rerun, I know Joel Klatt compared him to Troy Polamalu when Joel Klatt was playing at Colorado and they played USC. I'm sitting there thinking, I'm like, you're not far off. Right? Nope. Like the way he puts his body on the line, he can play inside the box, playing pass coverage. He went up against Tyler Warren multiple times, made great plays on him. So he's number 2. Number 1's got to be the O-line, man. There were so many people that have been dogging the offensive line all year. And even from my standpoint last week, right? I called out the offensive line, but it wasn't from a performance standpoint. It was more from an accountability standpoint. And those guys answered the call. I mean, they looked like the slobs, right? The slobs in the middle 2010s, right? That they were famously the slobs. That's what they looked like. They were coming off the sideline. It didn't matter if they had snot coming from their face, blood coming from their nose, whatever it is. Those guys were celebrating. They were patting each other on the ass. They were getting into each other saying, let's go bury these dudes. And that's what they did. And they controlled that football game. And especially when you have a first-time starting left tackle who's not even a left tackle, technically a third-string left guard, and you do what you did on Saturday against a team like Penn State, man, those guys got all the recognition they have coming to them.
A memorable, significant win for Ohio State in the bag. It was 20-13. I don't think I reminded everyone what that score actually was, but it was just one of the It was fun to be around it. It was fun to cover it. It was a great atmosphere as well. Like kudos to, well, not to the traffic at Beaver Stadium. I'm not sure what in the world was going on with
That
that.
might be yeah. I mean, let me have a quick little bitch fest about that. If there was one place, listen, and I've went to Ann Arbor, Michigan my entire life, and for anyone who's been to Ann Arbor, Michigan, that in and out and just everything around Michigan Stadium is so hard to get to. It made Michigan Stadium look like, Columbus, Ohio, and how many access roads there are getting to the horseshoe, which they control traffic perfectly compared to Penn State. Oh my God. Like the traffic getting in and out of the game, the traffic of people going into the game, the gates that they have people go into. I'm like, this place isn't set up for a top 5 matchup. Like
Nope.
that place is set up for, Penn State versus Bowling Green, which they had earlier this year. I mean, that place it's absurd. It took us an hour to probably go what's normally a 5-minute drive, maybe 10-minute drive, an hour before the game. And I'm like, this is absolutely asinine.
They were not prepared. And there was a lot of unused traffic lanes for some reason on Saturday. But you know what? I don't even remember it anymore. It's over. It was a great coverage experience. I know you had a great time at Beaver Stadium too. So Buckeyes winners. They start November with a massive victory. They move up to number 3 in the polls. Still a long way to go. They play Purdue on Saturday at noon, and we have a full week of coverage on the way up to that. Zach will be back as always for some Buckeye Q, breaking down the defense from a phenomenal performance from the Silver Bullets. Maybe we'll be looking at some goal line stands. Those are short plays, but once a year I have to throw those challenges at Zach and see what he can break down for them straight ahead running opportunities. Or maybe we'll do Davis Nigbanosin, or I'll flip a coin. I don't know. I'll figure it out. But either way, he's going to be back to talk about the defense because we can do a lot more of that for Ohio State. Big winners. Thanks for kicking off your week with us. Monday version of the podcast daily. As always, it's a Bourne Blitz. He's Zach Bourne. I'm Austin Ward. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.